Thank you, Vice Chairman. I want to thank you all for hosting this, and to the witnesses, thank you for your time. Your presence here matters, and we've learned a lot. So thank you for taking time out of your schedules to help educate us. I want to start my comments by saying that I truly believe that diabetes is probably the cruelest and most underrated disease in America. There are a lot of other things that get a lot of attention, and I'm glad to see that this body is stepping up and focusing on this. Because it is such a long, debilitating process, many times we tend to ignore because we don't see the rapid decline of someone. So this is important, so thank you for being here. I was a practicing dentist for 25 years. I saw the oral effects of this week in and week out in my practice, but I also saw the systemic effects, and my ability to treat patients was, if they had diabetes, was greatly restricted. How they responded to care, how they responded to infections, how their body responded to antibiotics, all played a role in their overall health. I want to focus on something that this committee that some of the questions have already started to go to, because President Nygren, your comments about what you're doing in terms of food is really important. But I want to start with Dr. Herman. If you go back and look at the last, 40, 50, 60, 80 years, when did we really see the explosion, the exponential growth in diabetes within various populations? What's sort of the timeline, and how has that accelerated?
I think the dramatic increase in prevalence began largely in the 70s, and of both obesity and that paralleled by diabetes. Those both dramatically increased at that point, and I think the increase has been pretty consistent since the 70s.
Okay. And when we look at things that have changed from a policy standpoint, and this may be a question for anybody on this panel as well that may have a better history on this than I do, what in the early 70s changed our food supply? What did we begin to prioritize? And what was the biggest part of that? It was calories, right? So when we started to value calories over quality nutrition, then we set this thing in motion. When I first started my dental practice in 1992, I could tell the difference in kids that grew up in the country on well water and kids that grew up in the city limits that grew up on fluoridated water, because the quality, their oral health was dramatically affected, because the kids that grew up on well water had, just that they were ravished by cavities. Income didn't matter, okay? Kids that grew up in the city on fluoridated water, again, because without regard to income, they had much better oral health outcomes. As I went through 20 years of practice, I could no longer distinguish between the two of them. And the common link that I saw in this was the food supply and the increase in sugar in our food supply in every form, refined carbohydrates. I think we've got to be very focused on our food supply. We can talk about spending more money on SNAP. Listen, again, I think cutting fruits and vegetables out of nutrition programs is absolute lunacy. But I also think that funding, allowing folks to buy high sugar content foods is like saying we're going to pay somebody to keep smoking while they've got lung cancer. I don't mean to equate the two, but again, let's be smart about what we're doing here. President Nygren, when y'all have done the work and you've talked about the success that you've had, what other than money, what's the most important thing you think of? Do you think we should be doing as a government in terms of the nutritional aspect of what your programs are focusing on?
Thank you, Congressman. I think one of the most important things, as you mentioned, is being able to tailor the nutrition and the programs to Navajo people and in the different tribes across the country, which is important because every tribal nation is different. There is different foods and exercises and ceremonies that they use throughout their history. But if we can continue to tailor that, because I know over the past 20 years or the past decade, when we've actually been able to tailor it more geared towards more Navajo foods, more Navajo types of exercises, the statistics have gone down because we were able to tailor it to work with the existing dollars that we've been getting, and it's been very helpful. So I think that when we continue to think about the groups specifically to their needs, then it's a lot easier, because I know up on Navajo, as I mentioned earlier, it's very remote and rural, but there's just so much access to processed foods that there's not enough options that people can have more access to, I think. So I think education is very critical in that part too. So thank you.
Thank you. And look, I think we shouldn't try to make this make a false choice here of either addressing the food supply or continuing to innovate, because it's going to take both of these things, in my humble opinion. Ms. Brown, Friday, just a comment, and again, I practiced in a rural area. My hometown was about 64% African American. It was, and again, I saw this on a very regular basis. You talk about access to health care and access to health insurance. I want us to move, because I truly believe that Americans have access to some type of health care, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's private insurance, whether it's care on the exchange. I want us to really focus on utilization, and because I can tell you in my practice, patients had access to care. It was the utilization of the system, and all too often. And be candid with you, what we saw is that too many of our fellow Americans live in poverty, and they live in the crisis of the moment, and the preventive aspect of health care and the early access many times takes a back seat to a plethora of other emergencies that are going on in somebody's week in a given time. And Ms. Brown-Frounder, I don't mean to lecture you on this. Please don't take that. But help us talk more about the utilization of the system, in addition to making sure that people have access to care. And with that, Mr. Vice Chairman, I yield back. Thank you again for hosting this.